All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jake Shu. I'm chair of the Apprenticeship 2030 Commission, and I'm really honored to be welcoming our fellow commissioners to this meeting today. I'm also welcoming any guests and members of the public who are joining us. During this meeting today, the bulk of this meeting is going to be reviewing and discussing draft recommendations that the six different working groups on our commission have been developing over the last few months. We're also going to hear about some of the site visits that were conducted last month in Europe and also some of the supplemental virtual meetings with experts on apprenticeships across 4 countries and 2 states today. And finally, we're going to be hearing findings from the survey of labor unions and apprenticeship sponsors that was conducted by the Schaefer Center for Public Policy. The agenda for today's meeting has been posted to the Maryland General Assembly's website. I want to mention also just due to some last minute scheduling changes, we're going to move the agenda items around slightly today. So we're going to start today with really hearing about the site visits and hearing about from the experts some of the meetings that we've had around around apprenticeships first, and then we'll move into hearing from the draft recommendations from the working groups, and again, finally, kind of finishing up with the survey. Before I get started, I also want to remind our commission members and our audience of a few items here. First, this session is being recorded, and it's going to be made available on the Department of Legislative Services website in the next few days. As I mentioned earlier, the agenda for today's meeting was shared with members of the commission directly and is also posted on the Maryland General Assembly's website. So future meeting notices and agendas will be posted there as well. We're scheduled to conclude this meeting at 3 o'clock today. But if we can cover all the items before then, the meeting will close early. We will not be responding to comments or questions posted in the webinar chat. If a commission member has a question during this meeting, please use the raise hand function. And any audience members who might have questions or comments can email the commission members directly at an email, apprenticeship2030@ubalt.edu. Any messages received there will be forwarded to the Schaefer Center to the commission members. And so with that, we'd like to start really with a discussion around really the site visits and we had a number of commission members learn about, in our last meeting, we had a number of commission members really learn about apprenticeship programs on both the Eastern Shore and in Central Maryland. Now, some of our commission members then also traveled to Oxford, England, and Munich, Germany, to learn more about apprenticeships in both countries, which have much larger and long-standing apprenticeship programs. Just as a note, there were over 1.2 million people in apprenticeships in Germany in 2023 and 750,000 people in apprenticeships in England during that academic year. And so this time we actually took a great trip over there with members of our commission. And today, what I wanted to do was actually really start with I really want to start with Delegate Ampry, Marlon Ampry, who can speak about his experiences. As I mentioned earlier, Marlon went with us on that trip to Europe. In Oxford, we had heard from professors from both UK and Germany, as well as experts on apprenticeships, including our own Bob Lerman, and representatives from the Department of Education, Skills Administration, education companies, the National Health Service, and the National Center for Apprenticeship Degree. While in Munich, they also spoke with representatives from the Bavarian Parliament and the German Department of Commerce. And so with that, let me turn this over now to Delegate Ampry, who might be able to share some of his experiences with us. Over to you.
Hey, yeah, can everyone hear me? I'm
Yes.
so sorry I can't be on camera. I'm in a bit of a changing moment at the home at my house right now, so I had to move somewhere else. But my apologies for not being able to be on camera. But yes, the trip to Oxford and the trips to Oxford and Munich were really enlightening, eye-opening, and getting to really understand and see how the apprenticeship models work in Europe. I think one thing walking into it, the biggest concern I had immediately, honestly, was hey, Europe's a lot different than the United States. These countries are a lot different, especially in some of the wraparound services and systems that are already free and giving to people, right? So you think about things like transportation's, more accessible there and more affordable there. Things like healthcare, things like that. So one of the concerns I had was like, how do we replicate some of those models? But learning more about diving into and learning more about the models in the UK and Germany, I still felt that there's a lot of things that we can replicate and do here well. I would say that Germany definitely has the more robust system. The thing that stood out to me there was just how early they start the process in Germany. I believe it's in fourth grade. They already start having students to kind of make their decisions on what tracks they want to go on, whether it's the academic route of going on to a four-year university, traditional four-year university, or going down the apprenticeship route. I believe one of the things that stood apart in the two countries that stood out to me was just the acceptance in Germany, more so of the community and the way in which people saw the apprenticeship process and going down that path as something that was truly accepted and just as revered as doing something, going down the four-year academic route, something that England is still working towards trying to get their student and young people population more adjusted to. While we were in Oxford, I think one of the highlights of the trip for me was having the opportunity to, outside of just sitting in a beautiful old building and learning from some of the best and brightest about all the facets of the apprenticeship models, was actually getting to go on site and see it in action and getting to we got to go to a Mini Cooper factory, learn about the processes there, see people in action, seeing how they bring people through the apprenticeship process in the factories there. But the probably one of the highlights of the trip was actually getting to interact and have a really good conversation with those at a local hospital in Oxford and learning about individuals who had taken different tracks going down the apprenticeship model. We met a young lady who got realized at a young age in high school and middle school that she wasn't really built to learn in a classroom setting. She liked learning in a hands-on setting, is on track to become a nurse via the apprenticeship program that they have there at the hospital. Also got to meet a person who was a hospital administrator, fell in love with nursing while they were there. And then the hospital took them on as an apprentice to learn to become a nurse that way, right? So the non-traditional model, someone who already had a career, someone older. So learning about the different ways, the on ramps that they had there at the hospital was really encouraging, and I think the a lot of great takeaways from my time there, but just a lot of a lot of we're going to just figure out just the funding models there is a little different, the levy systems and how they actually companies are paying in to the programs. And how all of that works is interesting. And I think with the companies having to pay in, it kind of makes them more wanting to get something out of it, based on my understanding of it. So um, again, it's hard to summarize a 6 day trip of an information overload into a brief commentary at the top of this meeting. But I definitely, enjoyed it. I think there's the other thing that was great was having the opportunity to sit down with other legislators in Bavaria and Munich and learn about more of the legislative processes and things that they've done to make their apprenticeship models better, how they also work with the other states within the EU, and how they're able to allow students and apprentices to go across state boundaries, learn in one country, go to another country, and that that certificate that they have or that certification that they have is applicable over there, and how they've been able to work all that out. But ultimately, it was a really eye-opening experience. I'm truly thankful for the experience, and I'm still processing some of the things that I've learned, and how we're gonna implement them in this work that we're doing. And I wasn't the only one on the trip. Our the gentleman running the show right now was also there for a little while. So again, I don't want to steal all the gems of our time there, but I think it's important to hear from other people who had joined us. But again, I had a great time on the trip, and I look forward to diving into more of the details and seeing what we can do to implement some of that stuff here in Maryland.
Thank you, Delegate Ampry. And yes, I was able to join the first part of this trip in Oxford. And, for me personally, the real three takeaways that, were new, new insights that I really didn't appreciate before. I think first was that, the apprenticeship system, certainly the one in the UK, really is an investment in youth. right? And so the fact that they, it really is providing, a lot of support, really, even when the time that they're in high school, right? And so like they're being paid, and it was pretty explicitly discussed that, it is an investment because the productivity isn't quite there yet in the early days, but there is really this long-term investment sort of philosophy behind sort of talent in that regard. I think the second thing that also stuck out to me was really around this levy and really the net effect of that levy, because it's not simply just a 1% levy that's a tax that companies can use, but really it has a number of other outcomes, right? I think in particular, one of the ones I didn't really appreciate is that really what this ends up being is a um, transfer of resources or capacity from very large employers to the small ones, right? Because a lot of the small businesses cannot afford to run these programs. A lot of the large ones, with that levy, they can't use all those. They can't use that either, right? They pay into it, but they're not hiring enough to actually utilize the full effect of that they're paying in. So, the net effect is that this is also sort of a way of supporting small businesses with that levy and sort of enabling the system to work. And then the last thing, which is really something that I know we've talked a lot about in our commission in the early last year, is how fluid that system is. The fact that and I saw like Germany, I think was even more sophisticated, or maybe it was Switzerland, was even more sophisticated by the UK, but how stackable those apprenticeships were, right? There's a number of different types of apprenticeships, and you could start one and you can complete, and they would build towards others if you wanted to continue on that journey. And also just the fluidity between potentially some of those with degrees as well. And so, again, sort of when we start thinking about the fluidity of the system, it's not either or, it could be an and type of approach when we think about apprenticeships and universities and higher education. Yeah, so those were really my three kind of key takeaways. Any others people that anyone I'm trying to remember yeah, I don't I think we had Ann there and a number of staffers as well. As moving on beyond sort of the European trip, because many of our commission members were unable to attend that event, the Schaefer Center also hosted meetings with experts and apprenticeship trainers from Australia, England, Germany, Switzerland, and two U.S. states, namely Colorado and Indiana. These meetings covered a range of topics, including how apprenticeships in various countries are funded, how the education systems are set up to support apprenticeships, especially for those younger than 18 years old, and the role of intermediaries, sponsors, and business organizations, such as the German Chambers of Commerce and various systems, among many other topics that were explored. I joined a number of these calls as well. And again, I think really what jumps out at me is still when we looked at sort of the overseas models, just how much of this really is an investment, right? And the understanding that this is really an investment in workforce and talent, that this isn't simply that this is really something that also the business communities and their sort of intermediaries all buy into as well. And so there's a really deep alignment across these different systems. But I know there was a number of other of our commission members and their staffers who were on these calls as well. So I want to kind of open this up to any commission members who may have some comments about what they heard in some of these sessions. I know Senator Rosapep and Denise, you were both on a number of these calls. Any reactions you'd like to share with the group?
I'm happy to jump in. Um, I would say the major takeaways for me were that in advanced industrial countries with somewhat different economic and political cultures have managed to scale up apprenticeships. In the German situation going on for a long time, but the UK and Australia have really, they were in our situation like 20 years ago, and they've gone from where we are to where they are in a quite short period of time. But it's been because of the intentional government investment policy, making it a priority, putting it on the same level with the investment that the United States has made over the past 30 or 40 years in higher education. And he said, we're going to do the same thing with apprenticeship. And they did it. And so to me, that's the major takeaway. It shows it can be done, and also the fact that Australia and the UK are not Central European countries. They're not countries. We talked a little bit about this. In Germany, they have mandatory chambers of commerce. They have industry-wide unions. We don't have as much of that in the United States, and they don't have as much of that in the UK. The UK economy is more like ours, and they've been able to make it with different tools. The other thing is that, I think Malin mentioned this, but the fact that particularly in Switzerland, it's basically 16 and 17-year-olds who are going into apprenticeships, which is exactly what the blueprint lays out. And so I think they sort of demonstrate that the notion that apprenticeships have to start at a older age, I think, is disproven by the experience of some of these other countries.
Thank you, Senator. Any other comments or feedback from other commission members who may have been on these calls? Yes. Donna.
Yeah, along those lines, I was on the calls with the countries, and I found it really interesting that in both Australia and in UK, they have recently, when I say recently, maybe over 5 years or so, experienced a major decrease in youth apprenticeships. And I think we need to explore that so that they hit a wall and then it's come down. Some of it was described as the government changing. I think in England they were talking about that, but in Australia particularly, less than 10% are 15 to 19 years old. And then they also had a decrease with people under 25. And so, knowing what caused that can help us plan ahead. If that is, if we're trying to continue to hit the 45% mark, they have started before us, as the senator said, and now they've noticed this decrease happening. And so we need to look at that and what were the influences of it.
Thank you, Donna. Other comments or feedback from the commissioners? Well, for those who were unable to attend, these sessions were recorded and they're available on the commission's webpage on the website of DLS, the Department of Legislative Services. Schaefer Center staff member will post a link into this chat for this meeting. I encourage you all to be able to spend some time and watch those recordings. They're really jam-packed with a lot of information, a lot of good insights that I think is going to really inform our commission. And so with that, let me turn this back to really the main topic for today, really is to hear from our different working groups about some of the work around the recommendations, the preliminary recommendations. At our last public meeting, we had heard about this, we've been hearing about some of the scope of what the working groups are going to be working on this year. They've been researching various issues that employers, labor unions in the state of Maryland have been facing in achieving our commission's goal. Today, we're going to discuss some initial draft recommendations from the different working groups to help our state reach the goal of expanding registered apprenticeships in industry sectors with skill shortages. I want to remind everyone that, our goal here is to increase the number of registered apprenticeships to at least 60,000 by 2030 and having 45% of high school graduates completing the high school level of a registered apprenticeship by graduation. So today I've asked our working group chairs to share their group's draft recommendations, and then we'll have some time to discuss each. I suggest keeping each work group's presentation and discussion to around 15 minutes in total, so we'll have some time for other items on the agenda. So to kick us off, let's start with the work group on addressing barriers to high school and youth apprenticeships, chaired by Myra Norton and co-chaired by Senator Mary Beth Carosa. Over to you.
Thank you, Jake. All right, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Can I do this? Hold on. Yes. Let's see here. Do you see my screen? Yes, okay, thanks. Okay, and Senator Carozza, please jump in if I get anything wrong here, or if I fail to say something I should say. Okay, so for our work group, one, I just want to preface this by saying what we're about to walk through are very much draft initial thoughts about recommendations, and there are some other topics that we're still digging into as a work group. So, but here's where we are so far. I want to just remind everybody the two kind of critical strategic issues that our work group wants to underscore. One, the criticality of a strategy for employer recruitment to make these apprenticeships available. So the barriers to high school students only become real and tangible once we know what types of jobs are going to be available and what employers need in order to enable high school students to participate. And then also an acknowledgement of the realities that there are local issues that are specific to each LEA. And so as we think about the strategies that we develop, there needs to be consideration of that variability. Last time we talked through where we were from the recommendations that were made in the interim report that were germane to the work that our work group is doing. We've gone through those, what I'm calling kind of incomplete recommendations, the recommendations that haven't been fully actualized, and have some draft recommendations in terms of updating them. So one of the recommendations that is in process but not completed was around really budgeting and appropriate resourcing for the CTE committee. And so we're recommending that we update this recommendation to just ensure that as we're tasking the CTE committee with more work, that we make sure if we want it to be done, we make sure that it's resourced appropriately. And I would say that that's probably across the board as we're identifying things that need to be done to expand apprenticeships. We need to be mindful of the resources that are required to do it. Recommendation 4, we're recommending updating this so this was a directive that the CTE committee should be responsible for developing communications to educate and raise awareness of career readiness and apprenticeships in school. Our recommendation is really to elevate that communication, awareness, and education campaign to the appropriate level of accountability. So certainly if this commission, or if we think the CTE committee is the right place to do that, these kinds of communication campaigns are not cheap. So there's work that has to go into this. And I think the question that our work group is asking is also like, is this really broader than the CTE committee? Or when we talk about this kind of communication, awareness, and education campaign, how do we make sure there's alignment across all the stakeholders that have to be involved to build an apprenticeship system here that is scaling in the way that we want it to?
And Myra, if I could just add to this recommendation, I think the importance here is elevating it to a level where there's some involvement with the governor's office and staff. And when you have a priority that really does stretch across different departments and agencies, as our priorities with CTE and apprenticeships are in that category. My past experience when I was in the executive department is the way that you ensure that the stakeholders are all working together and coordinating it is that it is elevated at that level. So we avoid situations where one department's saying, well, that's MSDE, or that's Department of Labor, or that's another state agency or department. So, this is one that I really think it's a way then we can keep all our stakeholders engaged at the appropriate level.
Thank you, Senator Carozza, for that color. Okay, then recommendation 5 was about having the CTE committee study adapting high school performance evaluation metrics to incorporate these other components of career readiness, technical and employability skills, et cetera. This work is already underway by AIB and MSDE, and so we're recommending just updating this to support that current review that's underway. Let me move to the I'll get through all of them and then open it up for any questions or discussion, if that makes sense. This is the last set of these incomplete recommendations. So recommendation 7 and 9 were about publishing guidance from various bodies on some of the kind of perceived barriers to having high schoolers participate in apprenticeships. We're still not clear that that guidance has been made public. And so I'll be honest, I'm not sure exactly how to make that happen, but we definitely should make that happen. So both the guidance from the Attorney General and the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights around making it clear that age discrimination against young people who can work legally is against the law in Maryland. So that's one piece. And then the other piece is with Department of Labor and Maryland Occupational Safety Health Administration issuing public guidance on occupational safety and health requirements for registered apprenticeships that are targeted at youth. We also would like to update that recommendation. Not only that should certainly be published somewhere, and likely the way that gets published by those bodies is it's a fairly, I don't know, regulatory, kind of bureaucratic wording, whatever. We should have that, but then we think that that guidance needs to be needs to be disseminated to and probably maybe as part of the kind of marketing and communications plan we talk about. That information needs to be communicated in a consumable way to bodies like chambers of commerce, unions, trade associations, other employer-facing bodies, where these kinds of questions may arise, where employers may think this is a barrier, or that there's some reason that they can't have high school students participating in apprenticeships. So that's our recommendation there in terms of updating those two. Recommendation 10, this was about kind of analyzing the potential loss of temporary cash assistance, supplemental nutrition assistance program benefits, and other aid when youth are employed in apprenticeships. So we're recommending that we update this recommendation to, one, assign accountability for completing this analysis. I believe the Department of Labor has been doing this, and if that's the right body to assign that work to, but just I think we need some accountability to say, has the analysis been complete? And based on that analysis, are there any regulatory changes that need to be recommended to address any of the identified barriers there? And then probably also this, once we've kind of gone through the work of identifying and mitigating any of those potential barriers, that needs to be communicated. So I would also say, let's fold that into the broader communication, education, awareness work to let both students and their families know that these perceived barriers are not there. And then recommendation 12 is looking at, basically asking the Department of Education to look at ways in which the in-school requirements might be adjusted to better support students that are completing an apprenticeship. We are recommending that we update this recommendation because this is definitely ongoing. The CTE committee is working very closely with MSDE already, and to ensure that the Perkins plan that gets developed and is presented is aligned to support the work of increasing students participating in registered apprenticeships. Senator Caruso, did I miss anything? Anything you want to add there?
Just real quick comments on on recommendations 7 and 9. The importance of that is, rather than just have an agency or department check the box that they provide some guidance, is to actually put the guidance in English and then share it with different trade associations, unions, and others. So it's actually usable information. So it does tie with what we're doing with our communication strategy as well. When we get to the recommendation 10, I think it's really important, and I think Senator Rosapet might be the one, more knowledgeable on this, but to the extent that we're finding that there's some confusion about the benefits, and if some of that can be clarifications through regulation, anything we can obviously do on the regulatory side as opposed to legislative, I think should exhaust that. Again, thinking that'll keep everything moving. So a lot of this is coming down to not only having whatever the individual agency or department, their piece of it, but being able to summarize that information in a way that is really usable for all the stakeholders.
Thank you. I thought I saw someone had their hand up, but now I don't see it. So please, if
It,
Us-
it was me. Hi everybody, and thank you, Myra, for this.
Yeah.
I was trying to think through like where the accountability, like where you feel the accountability might be like misplaced, and whether I thought it belonged with the Labor Department or not. But I think what would be best, since Rachel Stevens Parker, I don't see her on from the Governor's Workforce Board, would be that we like take that offline and figure it out in partnership. So I'm happy to work directly with you, Myra, on that too.
Yeah, I'm not saying, I know I had gotten feedback from Rachel that the Department of Labor was investigating some of that stuff. I'm not suggesting that's where the accountability should sit, but I think to say the commission should work with, it's like, I think we need to be clear, like how are we actually going to get this done?
Totally. Who does what when? I
Yep.
completely agree. And I would share with the commission and members of the public that we are actively looking into some of these issues, but for sure. So I'll be happy to report out at the appropriate time there. Sometimes it seems like things shouldn't be so complicated, but you want to get it right, and it's rather a lot to untangle.
Totally. Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is where we are with the sort of incomplete recommendations on our recommended updates. And then last slide here is, and I've got a numbering, sorry, should be 1, 2, 3, 4, but that's what you get when a mathematician puts together a slide deck, I guess. Okay, so some of the potential additional recommendations: one, increase the maximum number of students that can be transported in school vans, subject to any safety considerations. Our work group recognizes we don't understand all of those regulations, and there may be reasons, certainly very important, good safety reasons for this. But one of the things that was raised by several of our local partners was this is a barrier that they experience, where it's a cost thing, where they are having to, hire both drivers and have vehicles to be able to transport students, where there might be an opportunity to lower that cost burden if we investigated what's possible here. So that's one piece. The second is increasing, and so this we got a lot of things in our work group that maybe didn't fit squarely in our work group. This is one that I'm going to raise because it's come up a lot, and it may not be one that our work group should, it kind of crosswalks maybe with employer and sponsor recruitment, but we heard from a lot of folks the need to increase financial assistance to employers to encourage participation in registered apprenticeships for youth. This could include things like access to tax credits, grants, technical assistance, et cetera. But just putting that out there as something that, maybe that's certainly something that's about encouraging recruiting employers. So maybe I feel quite confident that the employer and sponsor recruitment work group are certainly looking at those things. But given how frequently that has come up in our discussions, we thought it was important to highlight it here. Then increasing technical assistance and other tools for schools to support their apprenticeship services. So again, something that we heard commonly was, how one, there's variability in resources and expertise, et cetera, across the LEAs, and really more deeply understanding what is the resourcing that is needed, what is the support that's needed for schools to be able to deliver their component of making these apprenticeships work. And then the last one was encouraging local school systems to consider alternative scheduling programs to provide sufficient blocks of time for high school students to work at apprenticeships. And I will say we heard from a number of local school systems that are already doing this and have done this in creative ways. And we just feel as a work group, we want to continue to underscore this because that flexibility is going to be necessary to scale up apprenticeships in the way that we intend. So this is kind of where we are right now. We have a couple of other topics that we are currently working on as a work group that we weren't ready to put draft recommendations in front of this body, but we are looking at some issues around dual enrollment and how to support that. And also issues around IRC attainment by students who aren't in CTE programs and how we think about that. So just to give you two of the other pieces that we're working through. Anything I missed, Senator Carozza?
I'm just to add, and that was a great summary. Thank you so much. These potential additional recommendations, we are really hearing directly from those on the front lines. Our Chair Norton, has been very good about including some of the folks that are working these CTE programs and apprenticeships, on a daily basis, and including them in our work group. So, when we see some of these recommendations, it really should be through that lens, because they're trying to figure out how to reach our goals and what they need, what type of flexibility and authorities they need at the local level to do so.
Yes, and I do want to acknowledge we had a recommendation that actually sort of got met in the middle of, so one of the recommendations that came from the work group was getting clear on the definition of high school level of a registered apprenticeship and what is going to count for the 45% goal. And during the course of our work, the CTE committee approved all of that definitional language, and it has been sent to the AIB. But I just want to acknowledge that for school systems, it is the reality that this work is ongoing and we're rolling things out over time. I want to acknowledge that is a challenge, because they're sort of like, what's the goalpost look like? What are we working towards? And so the CTE committee is very mindful of that and is trying to we have most all of the guidance is out now. The one piece that remains is kind of the data, the targets, like what are the targets year over year to get to the 45%. But I think we have all of the definitional stuff is with the AIB. So hopefully getting those things solidified will really help the LEAs be able to work strategically on their plans going forward. But I think that's a very reasonable ask, and I just wanted to acknowledge that publicly. So. Okay, Jake, that's what we got from our work group.
Thank you, Myra, and thank you, Senator Carozza. Really appreciate that robust and detailed set of recommendations. Open up for any questions or feedback from our fellow commissioners here. Yeah, Jim?
Yeah, I think good work, lots of input. And lots of very good recommendations. The one that I just like to focus on, which we all know, is the biggest barrier, in my judgment, on the school side is scheduling. And that's one thing we heard when we talked with the folks in the other countries, is these 16 and 17-year-olds in Switzerland and Germany are going to school. At the same time they're working. They're just not going to school 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. And so rejiggering in a major way the scheduling for the 16 and 17-year-olds, I think that's the last of the new recommendations, but I just underlined it as a big one, maybe perhaps the most important for the school side. That was all.
Yeah, and I would say our work group 100% agrees with that. And also I'm going to go back and underline the thing that I keep saying, which is knowing how to rejigger that requires understanding who the employers are, what the needs are. So it's hard to do that in the abstract, right? It's hard to do that without knowing, like, do we need kids to be in school 2 weeks and off school 2 weeks? Do we need them to be in Monday, Wednesday? Like all of those things are possible, I would imagine, but I think for the LEAs, they need to understand what's the employer recruitment
Mhm.
strategy. Like, who am I accommodating here?
Yep, I agree.
Other comments or feedback? All right, let's move to the next one. The next working group here is expanding and registered apprenticeships in the state workforce. That's chaired by Denise Gilmore and co-chaired by Chris McLarian. So let me hand it over to you, Denise.
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I'll say, first, our scope, admittedly, is beyond just the state workforce. I mean, we're looking at local governments as well. We have several work group members who are looking at local governments. I'm not going to be giving any recommendations today. I think we're not, there yet. As I mentioned at the last meeting, we've paced our meetings out to have, a set of recommendations ready by the middle of November. We are on pace for that. But I can update a little bit on some of the meetings that we've had since our last public commission meeting. I want to highlight, we had a really strong presentation from Mike McMillan, President McMillan from ATU 1300. They've got a apprenticeship program that they have established with the Maryland Transit Administration. I think what was really illuminating from that is, it took some time. I mean, he really, he explained the process of getting to where they are now. I think it was, and they really, I mean, they have pins from day one, really fighting. It took a while to get the budget for it. Get to a place where they've now negotiated a really, strong written agreement for that. And it sounds like the program's real successful. We've also had a presentation from the director of the workforce development department at AFSCME, our national union. I think there, a few of the big takeaways are really the benefits of involving, really establishing that healthy labor management collaboration, from start to finish. It was a really helpful discussion. I know we looped in Howard County has a few apprenticeship programs set up with one of our locals there, really talking through how particularly using that labor management collaboration to work on some of the ongoing challenges that they encounter. We had a good conversation on, for instance, like the training that apprentices receive, and making sure that, we're able to continue to come back to the table and continue, working through those. So it was, really helpful conversation. And then most recently, we started to dig in and figure out what our, kind of big bucket, recommendations are going to lean to. We're thinking about it in terms of, if we were to create almost like a checklist for public government entities in terms of, what we want to accomplish when we're first setting up apprenticeship programs and then also maintaining them. I mean, I think there are two themes that, that in the direction that we're heading in for our recommendations, ultimately, two main themes. One is that, labor management collaboration, but also funding. I mean, I think funding is a pretty significant piece and being able to set these up and set these up successfully in the public sector. So we will have all of those ready next month. Thanks.
Thank you, Denise. Questions, feedback from rest of the commission? One of the areas I'd love to just maybe ask, for Denise and Chris here is one of the areas that your working group is looking at, just maybe some of the hiring practices or some of the rigid hiring practices that have in the past sort of prevented some of these from taking hold. Is that an area that you're looking into as well, or a topic of consideration?
Yeah, we had this discussion. I think, Maryland's interesting in that it's not necessarily like a strong like civil service test state, right? Like there's no civil service test like there are in some other states where we've had to, work on apprenticeship programs with. I certainly think, and Chris, feel free to jump in, looking at state government, counties are a little bit differently, but I don't think that there's any restriction that exists currently in establishing apprenticeship programs. I mean, certainly in, state government, there's nothing in law currently that prohibits the employer from establishing a new title, right? I think the far larger barrier, the barrier that we've spent the most time talking about, is funding. I mean, if you can't actually fund RTI, if you don't fund a wage progression, if you can't fund a position, and then for the apprentice to graduate into, that's by far the bigger barrier.
Erin?
Yeah, well, I would just say, like, I think there's just tremendous opportunity in the public sector to work with our union partners and sister agencies at the state and local government to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. So I'm excited to kind of see how that progresses. But I wondered, actually, maybe not it could be a question for you, Denise. I'm not totally sure. But for folks that went overseas or were able to tune into the majority of the international conversations, are other places doing this really well in the public sector? Are there any lessons to learn?
I'll just jump in. I mean, I didn't, admittedly, I didn't go on the trip or really get a chance to catch many of the, work group meetings with other countries. But I think there are lessons to learn right here in Maryland for what it's worth. I mean, I think we have some really good examples of public sector apprenticeship programs. It's figuring out how to scale those. I mean, I think consistently the thing that, makes those programs successful is, union collaboration from the start, ongoing union collaboration. I think that's really important. And then I hate to be a broken record on this, but funding, so I'll just throw that piece out, but certainly I'm, curious what others think on in terms of the, national or international setup.
Chris, you have your hand raised. Do you want to comment on that, or you want to raise another?
In fact, so Denise is, chair of our work group, and I was going to say the same thing. I got to sit in on the Germany call, and it was very enlightening to hear from the start. They went through their apprenticeship model. It is definitely more robust, but everywhere there's a unionization within a sector, the union is there at the very beginning of the process, right? They develop everything in tandem with management. I thought that was really, eye-opening. It's been a little bit opposite at times on the American side, but if there's a recommendation that comes out of it, and Chair Gilmore said the same thing a few minutes ago, is that that inclusion on the front end is going to help to open up everything from discussion on occupations to ensuring that there's funding for the related instruction for the position itself, to make sure there's an adequate program, not just to build, but to sustain, so that by the time 2030 gets here, it is really entrenched and moving forward for decades to come, and it's not just a fly-by-night training program. So I didn't get to go to Germany, but I did get to listen to the call, and they said several times about that impact. And there were some comparisons like the Swiss and Swedish model that they brought out with the unions as well. So, I thought it was really interesting, and thanks for allowing us to share that.
Jim?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing on the union role. In addition to what Denise talked about and what Chris talked about, and this is, I don't know how the union setup is in the public sector in Germany, so I have no opinion about how they do it. But in Maryland, we have a small number of unions that represent folks in a whole variety of agencies. That's a real plus, because if the union broadly is bought in and understands it, it can help the managements in lots of agencies that have less experience with it. And so I think that in terms of scaling, I think this involving the unions up front, I mean, it's obviously true with AFSCME, which is the largest in state government, although there's some others, but it's also true in terms of the Maryland Educators Association, which represents all but one of the teaching workforces in Maryland. So I think the union role in scaling, I think, is important in the public sector, particularly.
Thank you. Any other points of feedback here? All right, let's move to the next working group here. And unfortunately today, Brian Cavey could not join us. And so I don't know if Sarah wants to, his co-chair. The next group is really the Employer and Sponsor Recruitment Working Group. It's chaired by Brian Cavey and co-chaired by Sarah Shepard. So I see Sarah is on this call. So Sarah, would you like to share out today on behalf of your working group? Looks like Sarah may be offline. Well, I have his, I can read out his recommendations. So unfortunately today, Brian couldn't join us on the call, but their working group has drafted 2 recommendations to the commission. The first I'm just going to read it out. The first is that his working group recognizes that the topic of intermediaries can be contentious. Labor management groups, unions, and employer associations, with their stakes in many industries and occupations, are crucial in creating innovative apprenticeship programs. We advocate for their involvement in the process. We stress the need for a meticulous vetting process when considering intermediaries, ensuring the quality of the apprenticeship programs and continuous monitoring after that. So really his working group's first recommendation is really around vetting of intermediaries and ensuring that we have high quality, reputable intermediaries as part of this ecosystem. The second recommendation that his working group has put together is to recruit new people and or organizations into any new initiative. An education campaign must inform those affected about the issues at hand. We recommend a marketing campaign targeting employers and employer groups to educate and inform them about the benefits apprenticeships can have on their businesses. This campaign will ensure that all stakeholders are well informed and understand the potential of apprenticeships. And a sub-bullet and a sub-point to make here is that apprenticeship is often referred to as the other 4-year degree. Therefore, the working group recommends a secondary marketing campaign to educate and inform the public about the benefits of apprenticeships for students and job seekers. This campaign highlights that apprenticeship is not just an alternative, but an equal opportunity for a successful career. And so those are the 2 main areas of recommendations from the working group on employer and sponsor recruitment. I'll just open this up to any feedback or from our fellow commissioners.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator Cardozo.
So at this point, you're saying kind of they're focusing in on 2 recommendations, one with the intermediaries and also then the communications marketing campaign targeted to both employers and the public. And this is the work group that is focused on increasing employer participation. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
Should there be, and maybe the work group, and I know the chair's not on there, but should that work group consider talking to current employers who either have successful and or challenging registered apprenticeship programs and include their specific recommendations? Obviously we've the different work groups have gone to different sites, and some of those employers have shared some recommendations, and even just to kind of get them on the table. So those of us who aren't on this specific work group have the benefit of hearing the recommendations that are actually coming from the employers. And I think it's important that we hear from those who are both successful, but those who are challenged. And I guess I would like to see that expanded. And if it means more of us working together on that, I'd be happy to devote more time to that as well.
Thank you for that feedback, Senator. And I think that's a valid point, right? As I do think it's important that we are going to be able to have some more employer feedback as part of this process. I believe Secretary Roth later on will be addressing some of that in some of her work on simplifying the process. But that's good feedback for Brian and Sarah in their working group.
Yeah, I
Denise?
guess. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Denise.
Yeah, Denise and then Myra.
Sure. All right. No, I just wanted to echo, our work group just tentatively had also looked at kind of role of intermediaries and also marketing of apprenticeship opportunities. So I would just say, I added ditto, I guess, on where that work group is looking at.
Thank you. Myra?
Well, my only concern is I think I'm probably going to be controversial as usual. I think this is a huge lift. I think we are talking about going from how many apprenticeships do we have available in the state right now? Like 12,000 or something like that. Aaron, somebody keep me to 60,000. That is not like incrementally increasing employers. That is like looking at industry, like getting probably even the folks that are currently in some of our larger employers, the folks that are currently maybe working on apprenticeships. This probably even needs to be a bigger conversation about overall workforce strategy for these major employers. And I guess I would just say that I'm skeptical that a marketing campaign is gonna do the job. Like this is on boots on the ground, talking to having an industry lens, talking to the senior leaders of, because this has for large employers, this has all kinds of implications, and it is a business strategy question. It is not anything smaller than that. And so that's my only question is like, are we thinking boldly enough about what it's going to take to go from 12,000 available apprenticeships to 60,000 available apprenticeships, which absolutely will require going into industries that do not currently offer large-scale apprenticeships. And so it's going to mean rethinking all kinds of things. And I guess that's my only question is, does there need to be some recommendation or set of recommendations that tackles what I think is the crux of the issue here.
Yes, and I think that's very valid and fair, Myra. In fact, I believe last year our recommendation, one of the preliminary recommendations in this particular area around intermediaries and sponsor recruitment was around standing up I guess, directly responsible office or individual, potentially to almost be a clearinghouse, right? To actually coordinate across different sort of agencies and groups to be able to do exactly that, right? To be able to start to activate this recruitment. Denise, I saw your hand up for, yeah.
Yeah, just in the spirit of making controversial statements, I think one other potential option is to also look at the goal and see if we can reassess the goal.
Right. And I just saw here from Sarah Shepard, who's the co-chair of this group. It looks like her microphone is not working, and her comment is that there still needs a lot of work. And one thing that was discussed in their last meeting was involving Department of Commerce to do the outreach as well.
Yeah, and I mean, Denise, I hear you on the goal, although I tend to be, but just keep in mind, I've been running startups for 18 years. So we have all kinds of unrealistic expectations about things, because if you don't do that, you'll never disrupt the systems that you're trying to disrupt. So my own personal view is that we shouldn't be afraid of an ambitious goal, that we shouldn't shy away from that, that we should be asking the question, what would it take to do this thing that feels impossible, that feels absolutely impossible? What would it take to do that? But I admit that is just the way I'm wired. So I'm down for everybody telling me to shut up about that.
I'm fine with ambitious goals as long as we don't cut corners to get there.
Amen. Amen. Yes, I agree.
Delegate Epperson?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So, I've stressed this once before, and I'm just going to say it, and then we'll leave it out there. The 45% goal, as written in the legislation that created this commission, is written differently than the 45% goal that's in the blueprint. The blueprint doesn't require them all to be apprenticeships. But let's move on. I've said that before, so I just need to emphasize that. We talk about 60,000, and that's based on the idea that we have about 1/12 of the students in public schools needing to meet this, the seniors. But no apprenticeship is just for 1 year. And so we're talking about more than 60,000 here, because this presumably would be something that students would do in their 10th, 11th, and 12th grade years, maybe continue after they got out. So it's an ambitious goal, and I think it's perhaps even more ambitious than we realize in terms of scope. So we have to be aware that we're not just putting people in an apprenticeship for 1 year necessarily. And it's really not a question, just a commentary.
Thank you, Delegate Epperson. We'll go to Senator Carrozza and then Senator Rosapet.
Oh, thank you. I thought the information that Aaron just put up in the chat was really important. And part of it is, we talk about the goal, and I'm sensitive to Denise's point as well. We also want to be in a position that as we increase the apprenticeships, which we will do, that we are gaining success, and you want to build off of success and not look at it as they failed to meet an unrealistic goal. And I think that's really important, because we have people that are working really hard right now to bring in employers for youth apprenticeships, to add adult apprenticeships. And we're already making some strides, and I just think it's important as we start to see these increases, and those numbers Aaron put up, are 8,000, 8,364 more apprentices to rank second in the nation. That's quite an accomplishment if we're able to do that. And so I think that's why when we talk about the goals, having realistic conversations about them, because I don't think any of us want to see this effort that as we're increasing them, that it's being viewed as, but they failed to reach this. So I think that these are hard, candid conversations that we do have to have as a commission.
Thank you. Senator Rosapet and then Secretary Roth.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on this numbers issue. I'll defer to Eric as the mathematician, which I am not, but I think the math does not work exactly the way you described it, Eric. And in fact, Bob Learman put up in the chat, it's basically if a kid's in an apprenticeship for 2 years in high school, that's like 27,000 a year, 30,000 a year. 60,000 does actually match up with the 45%. So I don't think it's more than the 60,000. So that's 1 point, and we can go back and do the math offline. But certainly, for all the discussions I've had with everybody, the intent is that it's not more than 60,000. It can be at least 60,000, but it's not intended in any way to be more than that. Number one. Number two is, when I look at the numbers that Aaron put up there, I look at it as, well, there are 2 other states that are way ahead of us. So if they can do it, we can do it. And then you look at these other countries, and they've gotten to penetration rates, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit in my work group report. It's not like we're trying to do something that nobody else has done. And so I think that, to me, is why we need to keep a focus on it's totally doable. We see other folks doing it. We just have to figure out the how.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Aaron?
So I think I just wanted to make a comment less about the numbers that I put in the chat, though I'm happy to maybe I'll say actually that at the Governor's Workforce Development Board meeting recently, we presented a slide deck on our apprenticeship strategy for the Department of Labor. And I'll be happy to circulate that with the full commission just so that everybody can digest that. I think those stats are in there, in addition to a slide that really shows like our growth line. So, we've been like in 2014, I'm looking at this chart right here. We were at around, I don't know, 7,000, it looks like, and we're at more like 12,000 now. And I think, that's good growth. But I think what I want to just highlight is that like we probably will only see this incremental growth without significant investment. And so I agree it's really important to be ambitious and push forth. And we've actually just expanded our apprenticeship team to have more people focused solely on selling. I actually and marketing and supporting businesses to make it easier to do that process. I see many of them are tuned into this meeting, so get your shout out. But we've really, as hard as everybody's working, I think a significant investment is probably needed to scale to the level of the blueprint goals. And if we get that, then let's proceed.
Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Aaron covered a big piece of it. I did want to say that 15 of our staff, coming off of the recommendation last year that we would have to have a team out selling, we would have to have more boots on the ground. As Myra was pointing out, you had to build this into a company's approach for business and training, like long term. It has to be everything from, instituting it within a business, setting our goals, but also having staff that could do it. I'll just say that the state staff that have been doing this are amazing. They're every bit as effective as an intermediary, as a third party person working off of a contract. They're embedded in their communities. They're embedded in state employment. They believe in apprenticeship. They believe in the employers, the unions, the associations they're working with. And in the little bit of time that we've had them, we're already seeing the needle begin to move. And I'll just say, Aaron made a comment the other day that one of our staff haven't even collected their first paycheck yet. And I had an analogy of their boots weren't broken in yet. But I mean, they're breaking their boots in faster than you can possibly imagine. So I think that to the points made prior by Aaron, by Myra, and everybody else, is that they are out there moving the needle in more than just a sales approach as well. So the good things have been happening, and it's going to only continue to double and double and double. So thanks for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yvonne?
Thank you, Chair Hugh. I just wanted to add and follow up on what Aaron said. I agree that there is significant investment that is needed, and we need to quantify that investment, because then we need to figure out where is the funding going to come from that investment, and what partners do we need to reach out to. A second point I'd like to add is, as we talk about increasing the opportunities that are there, increasing employers, and we've mentioned trying to increase state and local and federal agencies as employers for these apprentices, really thinking about how do we fund those positions, because there may be limited resources, financial resources on those entities as well. So even though they may be willing and excited and want to participate and expand the number of apprentices, they don't have the funding. Thank you.
Aaron, do you have a new comment, or is your hand just up? Or no? Okay, with Myra.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one other thing. I think, Senator Carrizo, you bring up a really good point about not wanting, like, we're making progress, and you don't want folks to feel like they're failing just because we don't hit an ambitious goal. I think that's an incredible point. The thing that the way I think about ambitious goals is it's like a North Star. And so if we think about it in the right way, it should change the way we think about tackling the problem. When goals seem out of reach, it forces us to be creative in ways that we simply won't be if we're building incrementally towards something. And I guess that's the piece that I don't know if the numbers are right, or if the goal, like, I just think we can get caught. I don't want us to get caught in the impossibility of it all. And so there's something about what would it take to, and it's all the things that everybody's saying. So yeah, all right, we need funding. Well, let's figure out what that is, like what we need, and I guess that's my point about why I wouldn't want us to focus on backing down from the goal, because I think it is the way that forces creativity and problem solving. I've just seen that be transformative. And I think we have an opportunity to whether we end up there or not is kind of immaterial in a way. It's more like, have we fundamentally shifted the way we think about workforce and student success post high school and all of those things. So
and if I could comment, I understand that ambitious goals kind of force that creativity and maybe forces that type of transformation. But in the meantime, and part of it is, it's communications, and it's also you want to build on that momentum. So the last thing we would want is, as we're building this momentum and we are, starting to have these gains, which we are, that, you get one headline that says, that, fail to, and it kind of deflates everyone. So I think part of this is, it's going to be communications to say we're making strides because, we are, we are, working towards these goals. So that, again,
yeah. And celebrate. We should celebrate the wins all along the way. Like that, just as much as you keep that North Star, you have to celebrate. You have to take a check of like, look at where we are. Just like Aaron, what you said, look at where we are compared to where we were. And both of those things, you can hold both of those things at the same time. Celebrate the successes and not, let go of what's possible because of the foundation that's being built and because of the success that's being realized. So I agree.
Well, thank you. This is an important discussion. I'm really glad this particular working group, this topic generated so much. I'll let Senator Augustine, why don't you get the final comment, and then we'll move on to the next working group because I want to kind of keep us on schedule here.
Yeah, I just want to circle back to this. Someone high level can just share with me when we say investment, what are we talking about? Could someone just articulate what the big elements of that would be?
I suggest this, Senator Augustine. I know Senator Rosapep has his working group is really on public tools and accelerators. And I know his working group has done a lot of work on potential areas, at least from a state side, that we can invest in. Why don't we hold that comment and question to when we get to his working group?
Okay.
Thank you. And so with that, let's move on to the next one, simplifying the sponsorship process, chaired by Aaron Roth and Senator Augustine. So I'll hand it over to you.
Hey, well, great. I will start, and I'm happy to have Senator Augustine chime in, of course. So we're still working through our recommendations, but we really have two buckets of activities, I would say. One, we're looking at how to leverage technology differently to streamline and modernize and make it just frankly exponentially easier to expand employer recruitment, concierge services, self-service tools for employers and sponsors, how to connect into like through APIs, other technology tools that might exist. So certainly, I think I brought to the group in our last public meeting that the state's apprenticeship data infrastructure is a legacy mainframe system, and there's lots of paper processes. And while sure these are time consuming for staff, I would say it's a big barrier for employers and sponsors because those processes at the state level take time. And if an employer wants to be able to pull up their information in an easy way, or a sponsor, they're not really able to do that. And so I think that's one bucket of activity and recommendations you'll see our group really hone in on. I didn't want to write anything down yet because we have another meeting coming up in a couple weeks. And I wanted to take the opportunity to make sure we get the verbiage right and socialize it with the committee and frankly do it the right way before we present it to the full body. But I certainly expect that leveraging technology will be one of the things that we focus in on. I think the other piece, which could or could not be related, that we're really digging into is making it easier to understand the incentive landscape. As more and more incentives have popped up, there are federal grants, there's state grants, there's local grants. How can we make sure that it's really super easy for employers and sponsors to gain access to that information? And so we'll be looking at how other states do it, looking at other ideas. It could be, like I said, part technology as well, part marketing. But if people don't understand the incentive landscape, and this group, we've spent a lot of time talking about how important those incentives are to starting up apprenticeship, scaling apprenticeship, how other countries and states have used that very effectively. In Maryland, of course, has too, that we really see that that's an important thing to focus on when you talk about streamlining the process for sponsors. So those are the two big bodies of work that we're taking on as a team. I would mention as well that we need to make sure that we have incentives to market, and that our incentives that the state currently has have been primarily funded by the federal government and are time limited. And so I think as we consider what those incentives should look like, and I'm certain Senator Rosapep will be talking about what his work group has been cooking up in a moment here, but I do want to flag that our group's talking about how we can market and make it easier to explore the incentive landscape, but we won't have any incentives soon. So I want to be fairly direct about that. Senator Augustine, did you have anything that you might want to add?
No, that's it. That's what we're working on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Senator Augustine. Actually, and before I move it over to comments just yet, I know Ava Net actually needs to jump off a bit early today from our commission, so I thought maybe what we could do is kind of really quickly fit her section in as well before she needs to log off. So Ava Net is she chairs along with Rachel Parker, Data and Insights. And so with that, Ivanette, maybe we can we'll sort of do 2 for 1, and we'll have you come and speak, and then we can take comments together.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I can try to share my screen to see if it works. Are you all able to see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. So our recommendations, we're focusing on 3 areas: estimating the addressable market for apprenticeships and apprenticeable industries and occupations, including data on annual job openings by industry and occupation, and looking at both degree apprenticeships and public sector in addressable markets, and thinking about occupations like non-traditional occupations and where workers don't need a college degree, even though some employers may require one. And then using data from Maryland State Department of Education to identify the number of high school students who are college and career ready at 10th grade and graduation, and the expected trends for both. So really understanding the numbers and trying to do some projections to see, do we have enough students in order to get to the 60,000 apprentices by 2030 to comply with the blueprint, and using MSDE's career clusters and the crosswalk between clusters and SOCs. Then we also want to track the number of adults that are 18 years or older that are participating in registered apprenticeships that did not start the apprenticeship until after high school. As we get into looking at the numbers, there's a lot of conversation quite often about what the numbers mean, how do we include or make sure we don't exclude certain occupations that someone may deem as not able to have an apprenticeship program. So really thinking outside of the box and looking at all options. Thank you. Any questions? Comments?
We'll open this to the full commission here. Any comments or feedback for either working group? Yeah, Senator Roosevelt.
I was just going to add that Mike Sears, the chief economist at the Labor Department, and Bob Lehrman, consultant of the commission, have been working very hard together to come up with a model covering occupations, but also covering industries. And so I believe that's going to be available in the next week or two. And so that we got to share that with all the work groups so people can have input into that and interpretations of that, because I think that'll be a big help to us going forward. So I want to thank Avanet and the work group and the folks who've taken the lead on this.
Thank you. Well, why don't we move on then to the final work group here, which is actually chaired by Senator Rosapep and co-chaired by Delegate Cha Wu. This working group is on public sector tools and accelerators. I can tell you, I can attest, this group has been doing a lot of work. And so, well, I'll turn it over to Senator Rosapep here.
Thank you. Is Delegate Wu with us today? I don't see him. Okay, well, I'll dive in, and if he's here and wants to make some comments, obviously welcome them. So I do not have a PowerPoint. We've talked about a lot of things, and some of the things are more well-developed than others, but this gives you a sense of where we are. I would say most of the items that I'm going to talk about, there's basically been agreement about the concept. There are one or two that there's some disagreement, and there's some for which we need more information. And so these are no particular order. First is policy around procurement and grants. Big opportunity. It's one the chairman has been mentioning since the beginning of this effort. And it turns out, which I didn't realize, that we already have that in construction contracts with the state, that above a certain amount, if you're going to get a construction contract with the state, you either have to have an apprenticeship program and pay into supporting the apprenticeship program, or you have to buy your way out by paying into the state apprenticeship fund. One of the recommendations I expect us to come back with is expanding that across most of, if not all of procurement at the state level, as well as grants. And we've done less work on grants, but there are a lot of grants and there are a lot of opportunities with folks who get grants to do apprenticeships too. And we could do it at the state level for sure. We're also discussing how to encourage or require the counties, the local governments, to do it as well. And then there's the federal level, because the president put out an executive order early this year, basically encouraging and requiring federal agencies, both with their own hiring and with procurement, to be moving towards apprenticeships. And so we have a substantial federal employment in Maryland. So part of the strategy, we think, should go working with the federal agencies in Maryland to pursue it. So all levels of government on procurement and grants. That's number one. Number two is licensing. We have a range of licensed professions and occupations in Maryland. The two biggest buckets are in the health department and in the labor department. And we had meetings with the folks, the executive directors of all the licensing boards in the labor department, and with Chris McClarion's help in particular, analyzing together which ones lend themselves to moving forward on apprenticeships. And quite a number of them do. And there are some quite major numbers and possibilities there. Happy to come back to details. But the idea is the industry is already organized in effect because they're licensed and there are state requirements. So saying, if you're in this area, you should be able to qualify through an apprenticeship. And we want you to be expanding apprenticeships. We did not have conversations yet with the Department of Health, but the issue is essentially the same, but the notion of using those as tools. Then we talked about regulated industries. So you have utilities, you have hospitals, you have insurance, and you have some others, which are state regulated. And so in most of those cases, their rates are decided by a state agency. And so it's a little similar to procurement, in the sense that you have a state decision maker who's saying what the economic model is going to be. And so the notion of having these regulatory bodies do more or less the same thing we're talking about with procurement is sort of the concept there. Then we overlapped with Denise and Chris's group on public did not get into great detail, but the important point is that 20% of workers in Maryland work for government, federal, state, or local. And so from a strategic point of view, a strategy in the public sector can be a very, very material contributor. And again, we're talking about state and local and federal again, because of the big federal employment in Maryland and the fact that the federal government is supportive of this, figuring out to make our federal agencies, whether it's Social Security Administration or IRS or these other agencies, lead their agencies in Maryland. Even if they're not doing it in Idaho or California, let's get them to do it in Maryland. And we can help them do it because we're committed to it. Then we talked about resources. Well, actually, before I do resources, one other thing we talked about, and this idea was just thrown out, we haven't done a deep dive on it, is employers get tax deductions for education programs they provide their employees. Those generally are conceptualized as you work doing this kind of job and you're going to try to get a degree to get another kind of job. One of the thoughts is to say that if you want that state deduction in Maryland, you need to be focusing that investment that your company is making on apprenticeships in your company to increase the skills of your workers in their place of employment, as opposed to leaving their place of employment. Let me just see if there's any others before I get to resources. No. Next bucket is existing subsidies. We have a whole range of state subsidies, tax and otherwise, to private employers. And think of it again a little bit like procurement. We could say that if you're going to get this tax credit or that tax credit, or you're going to get this help, again, you either have to have an apprenticeship program, or you do like in the construction industry now, you buy your way out of it. You contribute a little bit of money, and we have to model all this, obviously. You'd buy your way out, and that'd go into the apprenticeship fund to build up resources we need. Second, we do have the array of workforce programs now. WIOA, SNAP, summer jobs programs in a variety of places. We have the EARN program. And analyzing each of those to see how they could be integrated into apprenticeships. I mean, the one that's my personal favorite is the places that have, Prince George is one of them, that has a summer jobs program for high school students. Well, rather than just have a one-off job for the summer, integrate that in to how we pay for apprenticeships for high school kids in Prince George's County. That notion. Other places too. I'm not just saying Prince George's. This is one where we had some disagreement about the current state tax credit for apprenticeship. It's a small program. There are some members of the work group who felt that it was not a very efficient way to provide the resources to scale apprenticeships. There are others, particularly Senator Carrozza, I want to give credit where credit is due, who felt it was important to preserve. And that's one of the things we're going to have more discussion about. But we're looking at it that's one of the tools among resources. Then we talked, and this is goes really to Malcolm's question, is pay per apprentice. Maryland really has pioneered in the United States a pay for apprentice approach. And Chris or Aaron can describe it in greater detail, but basically using federal money, we provided startup grants in particular. I think one of them was in accounting and finance that Avanet was involved in, where the state gave some startup money for the AICPA to create an apprenticeship in finance and accounting, and then gave the sponsor $2,500 per apprentice added. So it was totally results driven, and it was designed to provide the impetus to push the employer over the edge to go into a sponsored program. Since then, California has set up a similar system at bigger scale. So this recommendation would be to create a pay per apprentice structure based on what Maryland's been doing. And where it stands right now is Chris McLarian and Bob Lehrman are working on developing a very specific model for us to look at. And we're hoping to have that by the time of at least the first draft at the time of our next work group meeting next Thursday. The question then is, how do you pay for it? And we learned in the course of our studies that there are 17 states that use part of their payroll tax, most of which goes for unemployment insurance. But 17 states use part of their payroll tax for workforce programs. And so the University of Baltimore staff folks are modeling what that would look like. We've also had meetings with the DLS staff who are experts on the payroll tax. And so we're coming up with a model of what would that look like, and what kind of numbers, what kind of tax rate would you need, what kind of tax base would you need. The attractiveness of this is it would be a very small amount of money per employer, but it could generate significant money for pay per apprentice to scale up, exactly the point Aaron made. And conceptually, it's very much like the union apprenticeship programs in the construction trades right now, where so much cents an hour work is paid into the apprenticeship and training fund on the work of current workers. And that money is used to train the next generation of workers. So in this case, you'd be using the payroll tax on all of us to pay for the next generation of all of us. So we're modeling that. We're going to come back with specifics on that soon, in the next couple of weeks. That's it. Happy to take questions. Happy to get better ideas.
Thank you, Senator Rosapet. Yeah. Comments, feedback from our commission? Denise?
I guess this is just a general question on if it exists. I'm not sure if I've ever seen it, but is there, I guess, an existing document already that breaks down how WIOA funds are spent in the state?
That's an Aaron question.
Because they go to several different agencies, don't they?
Yes. I'm trying to think if there's like a good document. Yeah, there are 4 different titles of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. So we owe a Title 1, the Labor Department oversees, but we mostly pass that through to the 13 local workforce areas of the state. We owe a Title 2. We also oversee the Labor Department in Maryland. That's adult education. So those get competed out every few years for supporting individuals that don't yet have their high school diploma. We owe a Title 3's Wagner Pizer. And that's state staff in the job centers with very specific duties. And we owe a Title 4 is VOC Rehab, which is administered by MSDE actually through their Division of Rehabilitation Services. So what I would say about WIOA is that if you see the law and the regs, it's like feet long. There's lots of rules and requirements associated with all of those funding streams. I think we should definitely explore how to connect those dots further. And I'll dig around a little, Denise, to see if there's like a one-stop shop for you, but that hopefully helps to give a high level.
Jim, how about Senator Augustine's earlier question around investments? How do we think about potentially, like, are there ways that we can really encourage or get more private sector investments into this area with these accelerators?
Well, I mean, the way I think of this, I'll speak for myself, which we haven't had exactly that conversation with the workers. The way I think about it is the employers are making an investment when they hire an apprentice, because an apprentice is not as productive as a skilled worker. Now, they're going to pay them less, so that's understandable. But they are making an investment. We're trying to get them to make that investment. That's number one. Number two is, because you need mentors for apprentices, that is time away to some extent from productive activity. And I've heard this when I'm particularly talking with the hospitals about it in terms of how it works in nursing, is that they're going to have experienced nurses overseeing, teaching, coaching inexperienced nurses. That's time that skilled nurse cannot apply as much to the direct service. So that's an investment by the employer. To get the employers to do those investments and to change the way, this one goes to Myra's point, to change the way they think about their talent strategy, to think about using apprenticeships to develop it, as opposed to simply taking away employees for competing employers. That takes more intellectual investment, organizational investment, not so much a cash investment. But to incentivize them to do that, you need to do what Maryland has already been doing at a small scale, which is pay per apprentice. And that is the model that made the scale up work in Australia. That is the model that made it work in the UK. That is the model that made it work in France. And so it's worked at a small scale in Maryland. It's working at a bigger scale in California. It's working at the scale we need it to work at in these other countries. So that's the way I think of investment. And that's going to take public money, because this is a public good in the sense that public education is a public good, in the sense that higher education is a public good, because in addition to the benefit to the employer, which is significant, a person who has more skills is more valuable to themselves. And that's why we invest in education and training.
Thank you. Donna?
Yeah, I would just add a little pushback to that, because in listening to what the senator said, all of that is what you do, except for if you're taking someone from the absolute beginning, which, we're talking about doing pre-apprentice training and some other training. But actually, all of our businesses, if you take on somebody, you really kind of look at a year of onboarding and, getting to know the organization, getting to know all of the other things that you need to do, even if you're in the same sector. So I think that, and it's not all true that it was government that paid for it in these other countries. There's a significant investment by the industry, and it's a three-pronged thing. And there's a lot of worker organizations and unions that also help build it, but they build it for something that, people could really want to accept and go into. And I think we're not looking at our total picture. We are trying, and to use this word might hurt somebody, but we're literally trying to force a program on people whose mind is not there yet. And that goes for both, not just our students, not just people coming in, but our businesses. And it goes back to something I've said in the past. I really would like to know, like all of the training that we have. And I know a lot of these industries and companies have a training component to them. And if we're trying to replace training just by using the word apprenticeship so that we give government money when we have, budget problems as it is right now. So I think we've just got to look at, a huge playing field here. And what pieces do we have to put in place so that we're not missing giant puzzle pieces? Because when I listen to the other countries and other places, there are a lot of pieces that went in. Some things fell apart, and it's not the panacea that they started with. And they're rethinking it, readjusting it. And those are the things we should learn from, not like what they have right now, but what did they learn along the way so that we're not falling over those same hurdles.
I agree.
other points of feedback? Comments? Denise?
Just adding, I mean, I think MSDE does quite a bit of licensing as well. I'm not, if we want to look at them too, I don't want to speak on their behalf, but I think, I mean, they license education professionals.
That's a really good point. We missed that. No, that's a really good point. We should add them to the list, Sarah.
And then my final thought on the payroll tax situation, would love to dig in with that more, but I think it's just it would make me uneasy to divert funds from unemployment insurance.
No, yeah. Nobody's talking about diverting. Nobody's talking about diverting at all. Please, I'm glad you clarified that.
Thank you. Well, look, today it's been we've have a lot that we're going to be working with here. And so one of the next steps is in the next week or two, we're going to set up a meeting with just the working group chairs and co-chairs just to synthesize these recommendations, right? Just to also make sure that, because clearly there's a couple of themes and topics that keep coming up in different working groups. So we're going to start to synthesize some of these recommendations. And really by the next time we have our public meeting, we hope to be able to have a final set of recommendations. There will be probably a lot of drafting in October and November as we start putting these together and again, synthesizing and making sure that they harmonize with each other. With that said, I'd like to really move on to the final topic of today's meeting, which is really last time we discussed some initial findings from the survey of employers conducted by the Schaefer Center. The Schaefer Center then, based on meeting, went and collected additional data from labor unions and other apprenticeship sponsors just to increase the number of responses. And so today, Sarah Fitzenetz, the Assistant Director of Research at the Schaefer Center, is here to provide an overview of those findings. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll try and keep this short since we are short on time here. Just let me share my screen. So yes, so we did extend the survey to incorporate additional data from labor unions and sponsors. So what I'm going to go over today is briefly the findings from that portion of the survey. Briefly, I'll review the methodology, the sample and the response rate, and then I'll go through some of the characteristics of these programs and specifically of the registered apprenticeship programs as well. And then I will briefly discuss some of the conclusions we found. I do want to note, I know commission members have not received this draft report yet. It is just finishing up a couple little things to it. You should have it either tomorrow or Monday to review again. So briefly, all sponsors with the registered apprenticeship who had an apprentice on the day that that Maryland Department of Labor pulled the data were included as potential groups for us to survey. This specifically included labor union sponsors and employee sponsors. We developed an online survey for them. It was just a customized version of that employer survey we talked about before, as some of the questions would not be relevant to the sponsors, especially labor unions. We did unfortunately have a low response rate when we reached out to those contacts. We had, I believe, 3 responses during the first period of data collection from July 17th to August 16th. And that was after several attempts to reach them. So we actually reopened up the survey and we sent a link out to several commission members who are affiliated with unions or connected to them and asked them to distribute it amongst their contact lists. And we ultimately got 50 responses total for this survey, 15 of which came specifically from a representative of a labor union or bargaining unit, so 30%. The remainders came from individuals who identified themselves as apprenticeship program sponsors. There were 24 of those and 11 private sector employer sponsors. I will note that I think some of the apprenticeship program sponsors may have also been with the labor union or bargaining unit based on how this was sent out, but that's not how they identified themselves in the data. And so just overall, we had 418 responses to our survey. The majority of them were complete responses, which means they did the entire survey via the telephone interviewers. We had another 50 partial responses to the telephone interviewers, and that means that they completed at least the first 8 questions, getting to that first question of, do you actually have an apprenticeship? Most of them were much more than that. And so we included that data where it was available to really make a full, robust data set. We had 4 people complete the survey of employers via the online survey. And then we had these 49 people complete the online survey of labor unions and sponsors with an additional one that was a partial complete. So we did end up with 418. Our initial goal was 400. So we were happy to surpass that. So if we're looking at some of the characteristics of these apprenticeship programs, and again, I'm going to focus on the labor unions and sponsors. We have some comparative data here, but as you might remember, about a third of the employer respondents had a registered apprenticeship, 45% had an unregistered one. Well, 98% of the labor unions and sponsors respondents had a registered apprenticeship. And there was one respondent who had both registered and unregistered apprenticeship programs. Within the labor union sponsor survey, the occupations, most of them were construction, probably not a surprise there, thanks to the historical legacy of apprenticeships within the construction industry. We also had 8 respondents who identified their industry as advanced manufacturing, 3 transportation, 1 healthcare, and 2 other. So we did receive some that were outside of what we kind of expected. So when we showed you the employer survey responses last time, we noted that most of the responses were very small apprenticeship programs, 1 to 5 apprentices. Within this additional data collection we did with the labor unions and other sponsors, the programs were bigger. As you can see, 72% of our responses to the survey said they had between 0 and 200 apprentices. We also did have 1 respondent, I believe, who said they currently had 1,000 apprentices they were training or administering. So much larger programs than what we were looking at when we looked at the individual employers' programs. About half of our respondents here said they were in a group program with multiple training providers or administrators, while 14% said they were the only training provider or administrator in the program. Interestingly, 12% weren't sure when in response to that question. Another place where we have a little bit of difference between the employer survey and this labor union sponsor one is the employer survey. Almost all of the respondents who had an apprenticeship said it was almost evenly divided between less than 1 year, program took 1 to 2 years, or 3 to 4 years, which seems a little short in some cases. But of the labor union and sponsor respondents, almost all of them said that their program took 3 to 4 years or 5 to 6 years, and it was evenly divided between those two. So these programs are a little longer than the employer ones. Also, another difference is that the apprentice mentor hours per week from the labor union sponsor respondents much higher on taking up the majority of the time. You can see that 61% of the labor union sponsor respondents said that their mentors work with the apprentices 31 to 40 hours per week, so up to full time, where it was divided a little bit more evenly amongst the employer respondents. For the labor unions and sponsors, 88% of respondents said that the employer provides financial support for apprentices related training expenses. And as with the employer survey, most of them are covering 3/4 to all of those costs. In fact, it was almost the same percentage. When we asked about youth apprentices, 80% of the respondents from labor unions and surveys said that they do have apprenticeships for youth who are still in high school. It's approximately the same as we found in the employer survey. However, with the labor unions and sponsors, the great majority of the respondents actually are using registered youth apprenticeship programs, where we found a much smaller percentage of employers were using those. And then if we look specifically at registered apprenticeship programs, also interestingly, labor unions and sponsors, over half of our respondents said their programs were actually registered in both the federal government and with Maryland state government, most of the remainder were registered in Maryland only. This is different than what we found on the employer survey, where 70% of them had registered in Maryland only, and much smaller share registered both federally and in Maryland. We asked why they are using a registered apprenticeship program, and about 3/4 of the labor union and sponsors said that it was because their occupation has basically always had apprenticeships. You'll notice that was a very small percentage of the employer survey responses. The largest share of the employer surveys responses, you may recall, were other ones. We did have we had 11% of respondents gave that as well. But you can see there were also more than 10% said it was because they couldn't get enough trained job applicants. That was because of benefits requirements related to prevailing wage, Davis-Bacon, Inflation Reduction, or other acts. And also that the licenses, credentials, and or nationally recognized certificate of completion were also reasons they offered these programs. Another point of differentiation with the employer survey is that just over half of our labor union and respondents said that they were receiving at least one type of the tax credits that are available, whereas a much smaller share of employers said that they were utilizing those. Now, this shows which of the tax credits we asked about, and the dark blue is the employer and the light blue is labor union sponsors. And so you can see the employers were mostly in this Maryland apprenticeship tax credit, as well as some with the sponsor apprentice incentive reimbursement, the SARE. In contrast, there was a much wider variation amongst the labor union and sponsor respondents. About 29%, 3 in 10 said they were getting the Maryland apprenticeship tax credit. 18% they were getting SARE, but we also had at least a couple who said that they were receiving tax credits in Maryland Business Work, the ARPA, other workforce training programs, Maryland Works for Win, EARN, state apprenticeship expansion grants, and others. So it was a much broader range of tax credits that they were accessing compared to the employers. Most of the respondents to the labor union and sponsor survey found the state registration process straightforward. You can see amongst those who said they strongly agree that it was straightforward, was 22%, slightly less than the employer survey, but a much larger share agreed with the statement that it was straightforward. Also, 20%, just over 20% said that they were neutral on that, neither one way or the other. And then this is just basically asking about some of the different characteristics of apprenticeship programs. Again, they didn't think these requirements were very difficult to meet. In fact, I don't know that any of them said that it was difficult to meet mentorship ratios, paid on the job training hours, RTI hours, or curriculum development. And most said it was very easy, or were neutral on the matter. So very briefly, the conclusions here. The prevalence of apprenticeships. We did find more apprenticeships than we expected when we started this. 1/3 of the respondents to the employer survey reported having an apprenticeship program. And because of our study design, all of the labor union sponsor respondents did have one. Most apprenticeships were in construction, where they've long been used, but they were also in those other industries, such as I talked about a moment ago, like advanced manufacturing, human resources, transportation, education, etc. We did find unregistered apprenticeships were more prevalent than apprenticeships registered at the state or federal level. Most respondents said their organization provides financial support for apprenticeships. And most apprenticeship programs do tend to be small, although again, these labor union and sponsor ones, they are training and administering much larger groups. And finally, some of the benefits and barriers to apprentices that we found. The primary benefits of apprenticeships were that they're finding better skilled employees, decreased employee turnover, and increased employee commitment, all very important for employee and employer loyalty. The primary obstacles to apprenticeships and to registered apprenticeships specifically were generally lack of awareness that apprenticeships were an option that they could take advantage of. It seemed in a lot of cases that there was making more information known about apprenticeships, about some of the aspects of it, the usefulness of it would definitely help some businesses that had not previously considered this as an option. There were also some suggestions from respondents about offering financial incentives, such as reimbursement for training expenses. And again, we had several respondents who suggested the state offer tax credits, which suggests that this is a topic that needs to be disseminated more. Many respondents also didn't know about the national credential, the credential that apprentices could obtain, and that they thought that that would be a very useful aspect of an apprenticeship for both the employer and for the worker. Most of the respondents didn't have difficulty meeting the requirements, and most did not use intermediaries. And again, largely because they were not aware this was an option. And finally, just my last point is majority said they were very satisfied with the support provided by our state employees who support apprenticeship programs. So there's a lot to build on there. And that is my last slide this time.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for that. I know we're running short on time, so we've only got about a minute left. So why don't we do this? I think given the quality of that report and I think some incredible data, what we can do is we'll make sure we pass that around. I think that's been handed out, but we'll obviously all of these materials will be available on the website. I'd like to actually, I mean, given that we have about a minute left, I'll just open this up to any other business or any other items that we want to cover today by any commission members. All right, if I don't hear anything, then I think that's the end of our agenda today. Our next meeting is going to be scheduled for Thursday, December 5th at 1 p.m. That meeting will be on Zoom as well, and information will be made available about registering to attend that session. And that discussion, that next meeting is going to be reviewing the recommendations to increase the number of apprenticeships in Maryland. So it's really a continuation of the initial set of recommendations from here. As I mentioned earlier, we'll have a separate meeting with the working group chairs and co-chairs in the next few weeks to synthesize these preliminary findings, and we can start the process of drafting. With that being said, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconds?
Second.
All right, thank you. With that, meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.